start in Ezekiel 45, verse 17. And the name of this message is called The Reason for Sacrifices. Now we know that Ezekiel 40 through 48 is about the third temple, the coming temple. Not the temple that they were talking about yesterday, as I'll show you at the end. That is not included because any real temple, there's many temples. There's been probably 50 temples. But there's only 2 temples that were sanctioned by Yahweh, of course, besides the tabernacle in the wilderness. But Yahweh sanctioned the temple or the sanctuary that was built by set out to David and built by Solomon, and Yahweh also sanctioned the rebuilding, we know with the book of Haggai and some of the other later Tanakh books, that he sanctioned the sanctuary that was built by Ezra and Nehemiah. We don't see any other sanctuary that was sanctioned by Yahweh, and certainly we don't see anything in these days where Yahweh has commanded a sanctuary. But we do know in the millennium there will be. There will be. You could read Ezekiel 40 through 48. Not only will there be a sanctuary, you see how in-depth it is. And again, if it was only spiritual, we know that the Christian church that are kind of built on Gnosticism, and Gnosticism builds all these spiritual analogies that lead to nowhere, they want to say everything is spiritual. And that's what they do. But yet when you read Ezekiel 40 through 48, it is so specific of the temple, of how it's built, of the sacrifices, that it can't just be an analogy. And then we'll see in chapter 45 and verse 16, and the people of the land shall be at this heave offering for the prince in Israel, and the responsibility for burnt offerings shall be on the prince, and a food offering and drink offerings in the feasts and on the new moons and on the Sabbaths, and all the appointed feasts of the house of Israel. He shall make the sin offering and the food offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings to atone for the house of Israel. So the question that comes up sometimes is, why? Why? If the blood of Yeshua, covers and pays the penalty for sin, which it does, then why? Why would there be sacrifices coming in the millennium? And this study really isn't on that particular question, although I will answer that briefly. We have other messages on that more in detail. This is more the reason for sacrifice to begin with, and then you'll understand why there will also be sacrifices in the millennium. And when you look at Yeshua returning, we know from Ezekiel 37 that there'll be a resurrection of the house of Israel, a physical resurrection. Clearly says it. You're talking about bones that are in the grave. You're talking about skin that's coming on the bones. You're talking about sinews putting on it and breath coming in. It's a physical resurrection. And who are they? This is the whole house of Israel. Now, why would there have to be a physical resurrection of Israelites at Messiah return? Because remember, there was no salvation in the first covenant. There was no salvation. We talked about this already. That if you look at sins of ignorance, if you accidentally did something, a sin of ignorance, then you could kill an animal and you would be forgiven. But you still had to give restitution, whatever that restitution is. So if it was a minor sin, maybe the restitution was money or paying back a sheep or whatever. But if you look at capital crimes, if you look at adultery, idolatry, murder, blasphemy, those were capital crimes. So in those cases, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life, that it was the death penalty. Now when Yeshua comes to magnify the Torah, he shows us the Torah says, you shall not murder. I say anger is murder. So we see that every one of us have committed capital crimes. So again, there has to be a life given for that. That's the only way to pay the penalty is through life, and that's why we accept the life or the shed blood of Yeshua in turn for our life. He is taking our place. That's why Colossians 2:14 says, he's taken our written code of debt. Literally, when you sin, there's a signed contract of your death, and he's taken it upon his tree, and he's nailed it to the tree of crucifixion. He's taken our penalty away there. Nothing dealing with taking away the Torah, but taking away the penalty of the sins that were committed there. So all of these Israelites that were good people in the first covenant, the tribes of Israel, all of the people that were looking forward to the Messiah, but it just wasn't the time yet. He didn't come yet. They all died in their sins. They all died with the death penalty. Now, if they were only resurrected in the white throne judgment, they have a big problem. Because they made a covenant with Yahweh. And that's why Joshua said, don't do this. You're going to sign this covenant, you're going to sin, and then you're going to die. And they said, no, no, no. But we want to do it. We want to get the blessings. And that's what happened. Everyone, even in the goodness of their heart, there was no avenue for salvation in the first covenant. So Yahweh, in His mercy, when the Messiah returns, there will be a great resurrection of the physical Israelites that will have the opportunity, because they lived that life and they already accepted the Messiah, but He never came yet. And they'll have the opportunity to go from the old covenant into the new covenant. So that's why there'll be the sacrificial system, there'll be the Levitical system, we know it. The Levites, not any Levite, but only one strand of Levite. It'll be the sons of Zadok who will be the priests. The normal Levites that were not faithful in the first sanctuary, they will be doing menial jobs, they'll be sweeping floors and doing things like that. The sons of Zadok will be the priests, but we're not part of that. We're already, that's why to be a first fruit, it's better. Because we will be glorified spirit beings, we will be part of the Melchizedek priesthood, and we have a whole different operation there. So we know that these Israelites that believed in Yahweh, they tried their best, but since there was no salvation, that's why, one of the reasons why there'll be a sacrificial system. But in another way, most of us, unfortunately, we have a Western mindset. I've explained this to people sometimes for years. Sometimes people that meet with us, they'll come every year and ask the same question that you tell them over and over. Because the only thing they think of with animal sacrifice is blood and murder. That somehow the sacrificial system was against the promises of Yahweh. And it says in Galatians, was the Levitical system against the promises of Yahweh? Forbid. Yahweh made the sacrificial system as a mediator or a bridge to bring the people to the Messiah. It's not against the Messiah. You know, so this is, again, this is the Christian mindset. This is the law nailed to the cross, that somehow, you know, that the system that Yahweh put in effect was a bad system. And it was there as a punishment for the people, but it wasn't. And as we're going to see today, this is why the message is not on the sacrificial system in the millennium. Like I said, we have other messages on that particularly. But this is the reason for sacrifices to begin with. Now, we're living in a world where we don't do that anymore. That was one of the most shocking things that the Temple Institute said yesterday, was the fact when they said, well, you know, we don't really have to sacrifice animals. They did it in the olden days as part of a culture, but today we don't do that. And I'm thinking, why on earth do you want a temple? You know, if you look at a synagogue today, you can do everything in the synagogue that they did in the temple except sacrifice animals. That's the main reason for a temple, because clearly in the Tanakh it says you can only do sacrifices in Jerusalem. You can't do it anywhere else. You just can't sacrifice animals wherever you want to. You have to have a temple in Jerusalem. And if you want the sacrifice to be accepted by Yahweh, it has to be something that He sanctions. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, even these people have no idea why there were sacrifices. They have no idea why. So we're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about that the intent or the meaning is what is important, and not really what's being sacrificed. It's the intent of it. Now, in English, when you say the word sacrifice, the word really means to give something up. You know, you could say, well, you know, when we first got married, we sacrificed a lot. You know, we lived in this little house for 5 years and we saved our money. We sacrificed so that we can buy a house someday. But in Hebrew, the word doesn't mean that. The word korban literally means to draw closer to through relationship. So it's not a giving up, it's a drawing closer to. It's the exact opposite of the meaning. And that's why I say, we got to get our Western mindset out of here, and we have to really think of what the intent was of sacrificing animals. So I'm going to go into this. I have 1, 2, 3 main points of the importance. And like I said, the first is you're drawing closer to through relationship. It's not a giving up. It's a way to draw closer to your Creator. And that's why we see well before there was any kind of temple, well before there was a Levitical priesthood, well before any of this stuff, we see even in the Garden of Eden, we see that Yeshua Yahweh did the first sacrifice. You know, and He covered Adam and Eve, you know, with skins of the animal because the sacrifice was a way to draw closer to them. You know, it was a system that Yahweh created to draw closer when sin entered. And also, they're called offerings. They're not only called sacrifices, they're called offerings. So it's something you're offering. It's something that you're drawing closer to Yahweh through. Matthew 26 in verse 39, Yeshua says, Father, if there's any other way, but let not my will be done, but your will be done. So the sacrificial mindset is one of surrendering your will, because that's the only way you can draw closer to Yahweh, by surrendering your will. So it was a physical, systematic system of surrender to Yahweh. You're drawing closer to through relationship, that you're surrendering to Him, and in turn, He's accepting that sacrifice to you, and He's drawing closer to you. Jacob 4 and verse 7. Jacob 4 and verse 7. He says, submit to Yahweh, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Many times people get it the opposite. They want to think that on their own human strength that they can resist Satan, and you can't. He's smarter than we are. The first thing you have to do is submit to Yahweh. You know, you have to surrender to Yahweh, and then once you surrender to Yahweh and His Spirit is leading you, only then can you resist the devil. You can't do it on yourself. The same way why we said, why we take the symbols first, and then we take the leaven out the next day. Because you need the Spirit of Yahweh in order to take the leaven out of your life. So again, when you think of the sacrificial system, think of submission. You know, it's a way of drawing closer to Yahweh through submission. Matthew 10, 37. Matthew the 10th chapter, verse 37. The one loving father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. The one loving son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his staff and follow after me is not worthy of me. The one finding his life will lose it, and the one losing his life on account of me shall find it. So the whole sacrificial meaning is one of losing your life. It's one of not doing your will, but drawing closer to the Heavenly Father and seeking His will. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to draw closer to Him to seek His will. One of giving up something. The giving up of what you have. Philippians 3 and verse 7. Paul says, but these things which were once a gain for me, I have counted a loss for the sake of Messiah. But no, rather I also count all things to be lost because of the excellency of the knowledge of Messiah, Yeshua, my Master, for whose sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them to be trash, that I may gain Messiah. So here it is, somebody who was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He learned at the feet of Gamaliel, who was one of the most profound teachers in that time period, and came from a fairly wealthy family, you know, a very astute family. And here it is, what does he say? He counts all those things to be nothing but trash. So again, the sacrificial system, it's a mindset of getting toward the spiritual, drawing closer to through relationship. And that's what they were looking for. Many times you'll see Abraham sacrificing an animal, you'll see somebody sacrificing an animal. And it wasn't just because of blood and sin, you know, and gore. It was about drawing closer to. It's a way to draw closer to through relationship. So remember, the sacrifices and the smoke is going up to heaven, and it was a way for those people to draw closer to their Creator. Because you can't draw closer to Yahweh through worldly things, but the sacrifice is something that's going up. And that's why, interesting what we said, when you looked on the Feast of First Fruits, you know, which was now 2 days ago, you see that the priest was to wave it. He was to wave it because it was a transferring, just like the laying on of hands is a transferring of the sins to the animal, or a transferring of the spirit to the person. When you're waving the wave sheaf, you're transferring what's on heaven up to, or what's on earth up to heaven. It's a transfer. So it's the same way with the animal. As you're killing this animal and the smoke is rising up, there's a transferring that's happening. You know, that you're drawing closer to your Creator through that. And of course, the more worldly things we hold on to, the less faith we will have. Psalm 24, the earth is Yahweh's and the fullness thereof, and the people that those who live in it. So sacrifice was a way of understanding this, of giving up the worldly to get closer to the heavenly. The second part of why sacrifice, the reason for sacrifice in the ancient world, was to give the best you had. It was of giving Yahweh the best you have. We go to Exodus 12. Verse 3. Speak to the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they shall each take for themselves an animal of the flock for a father's house, a flock animal for a house. And if the house is too small for a flock animal, he and his neighbor next to his house shall take according to the number of souls, each according to the amount of his eating. You shall count concerning the flock animal. A flock animal, a male without blemish, a yearling shall be to you. You shall take from the sheep or from the goats. So it had to be an animal without blemish. It had to be an animal without blemish. So when you think of this sacrificial system, you're taking the best thing you have. You're taking the most cherished thing you have. You're taking this animal that you nurtured right out of the mother's womb, and you cared for it, and you fed it, and you made sure that it was something. And that animal, what does it give you? It's giving you, the sheep is giving you wool for clothing. It's giving you milk, to drink, and curds for food. It's giving you maybe also shelter. You're taking the goat hair and you're covering your tent. So this is something that was functional to you. It was something that gave you your daily needs. And what are you doing? You're giving it up to Yahweh. Because you're surrendering to Him, because He's going to give back to you tenfold. So remember, it wasn't just the fact of just grabbing an animal, because it wasn't like today in Western society where pets were like people. That people going in, hey, would you like a family picture of us? And you see the mother and the father and the two children and the dog in the family picture, or the dog in the bed with them, watching TV, eating potato chips or something. It wasn't like that. But the animal was something that was a possession and it was personal. And people cared for them. It talks about it in Proverbs, how the righteous man always cares for his animal. And that's why when Yeshua was even given the examples, he said, won't you on the Sabbath, untie your animal and lead it to drink? Because people were humane. So you didn't think of them as humans, or you wouldn't have the sacrificial system. But you did care for them. They were something that were special to you. They were something that provided with you with your daily needs. So to care for this animal for so long, and then to take that animal and to sacrifice it to Yahweh. It's because you see everything that Yahweh is blessing you with, and you want to give the best you have to Him. But what happens? Human nature is human nature, as we'll read here in Malachi. What the people were doing is, they were telling Yahweh, I'm going to give you the best, and then they're playing that little shell game afterwards. Where the little pea is in there, and you have to try to find it, and then whoop, it disappeared. And that's what they were doing. They were offering, at least in words, the best sacrifice, but then when the time came, they were given a blemished sacrifice. And Yahweh says, no, that's not acceptable to me. Let's go to Malachi 1. In verse 6. A son honors his father, and a servant his master. If then I am a father, where is my honor? And if I am a master, where is my fear? Says Yahweh of hosts, to you, O priest, who despise my name. But you say, why have we despised your name? You were offering defiled food on my altar. And you say, what have we defiled you? It is in your saying, the table of Yahweh, it is to be despised. And if you offer the blind for a sacrifice, is it not evil? And if you offer the lame and the sick, is it not evil? Bring it now to your governor. Will he accept you or lift up your faces? Says Yahweh of hosts. And this is the point. Sometimes I even say, if all of a sudden you got a call from Benjamin Netanyahu and he said, I want to meet you today. I'm sure each of us would want to put on our best clothing and our nice suit, and we want to go there and look our best. But sometimes we come to Sabbath services before Yahweh, the King of the universe, and we come dressed down. And that's what he's saying here. He's literally saying here, you know, you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. You know, what is it? Do we give Yahweh our best? In everything. In absolutely everything. And he's saying, if you're going before a governor, you wouldn't do that to him. You wouldn't bring your governor a lamb with a broken leg or something that was blemished, but you expect the king of the universe to accept this? And now entreat the face of Elohim that he favor us. This has been by your hands. Will he lift up your faces, says Yahweh of hosts? Who is even among you that will shut the doors, and you not kindle fire on my altar in vain? There is no delight to me in you, says Yahweh of hosts. I will not accept the food offering from your hand. From the rising of the sun to its going down, my name shall be great among the nations, and everywhere incense will be offered to my name, and a pure food offering for my name shall be great among the nations, says Yahweh of hosts. And Yahweh also says, you know, in Isaiah 42 and verse 8, I am Yahweh, I will not give my glory to graven images. It says in Exodus 23, that he will not, if you make an offering to the name of any other Elohim but Yahweh, it's an abomination. Very clear. Very clear. Because there's something different, and that's why I said, the difference between us and a religion is, this is real. And then when someone says, well, everybody says it's real, how do you know it's real? I just giggle, you know, I just giggle. You know, it's like Moses coming down with those 10 Commandment plaques. And what is Korah saying? Hey, did you burn them with your finger up there? And you chuckle, because for someone to ask that question, it only proves one thing: it's not real to them. It's not real to them. And I say this to the atheist: it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. The fact of the matter is whether it's true. And we have evidence. Faith is the evidence. It's not blind. We don't say, well, we just believe it in faith. That's the faith that the Christians thought up because they had no answers to their doctrine. Faith is the evidence. Faith is the substance. And you've been here now for 10 days. You're seeing the evidence. You're seeing the substance. You know, we have the chariot wheels in the Red Sea. We have at Mount Sinai all the evidence that this is real. Every place you're going, you're seeing the substance. And the miracle is that in 2,000 years, Yahweh has left all this evidence here for us so that we see the reality of it. So the difference is, this is real. This is real. And this is the one and only real creator. And we have to worship him the way he tells us to. We don't take these cultic, pagan, evil ways that they worship, where they sacrifice their children, where they did all kinds of fornication on the altar, and we're going to take that and just change it and say we're going to sacrifice to Yahweh that way? No way. The same way we don't bring him a blemished sacrifice. You know, your tithe is the first 10%, not the last 10%. Until you take 10% and set it aside, none of that money belongs to you. And tithe is not just money. It's increase of anything. And that's my question. Are you giving Yahweh your best? Or are you bringing a blemished sacrifice? You wake up and I got to get to work, so I don't have time to pray and to study. You go to work all day, and then all of a sudden you're tired at night, and this 30-second prayer as you're falling asleep on your bed. You're giving Yahweh the last of your sacrifice. You're giving him something that's blemished. You want to give him your best. So if you're a computer programmer, you know, or if you're a carpenter, or if you're a piano player, you give the best to Yahweh, and the rest is for you and the world and everybody else. And that's the meaning of sacrifice. It's the best you have that you're given to him. And it's in everything in life. It's in absolutely everything in life. And that's the blessing of it. It's drawing closer to him through relationship. Because the more you're giving up to him, number one, the closer you're drawing, and the more he's giving back to you. But if we're keeping the best for ourselves, and we're giving him the crumbs, the leftover, he says right here, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable, and it's not the meaning. And that's why I say that the reason for sacrifices was so much more than just killing an animal. It was so much more than just covering sin. Yes, there are sin sacrifices. That's one type of sacrifice. You know, but there's also grain sacrifices. There's peace offerings. And the peace offering was the only sacrifice that the person got to eat with Yahweh. Because normally the sacrifice, like the sin sacrifice, all of it gets burned. We know that all the sacrifices, the priest gets to put in his fork and get the best. But the peace offering, you get to share it with Yahweh. Like the wedding supper. Because you're drawing closer to him through relationship. So that's really what this is about. It's about you wanting to give the best to Him because of everything He does for us. And you know what? That's the very definition of grace. Grace is not only unmerited pardon, but it's also the inspiration to want to give back. Even though we know we can't, we're not paying for it. But we want to because we're so overjoyed in what He did with our life that we want to give back. And I don't know if you ever had this problem. When I was a little boy, and I'd always think, when Father's Day would roll around, what do I give Daddy? And then you're trying to think, well, he's got this, he's got tools, he's got that. And sometimes it's hard to figure out sometimes. Now, what do you give to Yahweh? He owns the universe. I can't give Him the planet Pluto, He already owns it. Sometimes you can do that. They have this new thing you've probably seen for the last how many years. You can pay $50 and they name a star after you. Good luck getting up there, Just another way to get money. But you can't give Yahweh a star. He owns all the stars. So what do you give to the Daddy that has everything? Matthew 25. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When, Master, when? When you did it to the least of my brethren, you did it to me. So the way that we give back to Daddy is by giving to Daddy's children. Because He loves His children and He cares for His children. And when some of His children, us, are in need, that's the way we help. That's the way that's important to Him. And that's the way we give back to Him. So that's a free will sacrifice that we give. Like we'll get into it a little bit in Romans 12. The Melchizedek, the living sacrifice. Because the Levitical was the killing of animals, that was the shadow. But now we have the Melchizedek that leads to the reality, which is our life. Life for life. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. Yeshua died for us so we can live for Him. And now He lives at the right hand of the Father. So again, giving our best without blemish. Are we giving our best? And like I say, the animal became close to the owner. And for the owner to kill that animal, and I've never done it for Passover. I've talked to some people that have, that actually took a lamb on Passover, not because they felt they had to, they just wanted to experience what it was like. And they kept the lamb from a tiny little lamb baby, and then they raised it up, and at 1 year, they killed it at Passover, and they said it was dramatic. To take that little baby that you're feeding every day, and they're looking at you, and they're caring for you, and then you're going to come and slit its throat. But it makes you think how the Father must have felt, to the love that He had to have for us, that Yeshua, His Son, that He loves above everything, His first fruit, His King, the one that sits at His right hand, that He had to look away while He suffered, while they mocked Him, while they spit upon Him, and He had to look away because Yeshua had to die for our sins. So you get the whole sense of what it means, of giving up the best that you have. And Yahweh gave up the best He had. Heaven's best, Yeshua. Doesn't get better than that. So He gave up the best for us. Can't we at least do that? We could never equal, because what He's giving us is a zillion times more. But at least, even like I said, if you're a carpenter and you could build a building like this, you didn't get that skill from yourself. Yahweh gave it to you. So at least we can do is give Him the best. Maybe build a building for the congregation, then build your own house. That's what Solomon did. He built the house of Yahweh, and then he built his own house. Whatever your skill is, whatever your increase is, whatever Yahweh's giving you, you are to honor Him first, and then the rest is yours, to help others and to help yourself. 1 Corinthians 10:31. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says that whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all things to the glory of Elohim. Do all things to the glory of Elohim. And the third reason and most important reason of sacrifice is to build trust and faith in Yahweh alone. It's to build trust and faith in Yahweh alone. You are giving your best and you're trusting that He will provide. Just like I said, just like when I was just in Ethiopia, near the border of South Sudan, and they came and they had one sheep there, and they wanted to sacrifice it. They wanted to sacrifice it first because they wanted to give us the best they had. And then after that, though, they're not going to have a sheep. So the next morning there's no milk. The next morning there's no sheep hair to get. The next morning there's no, well, after we ate the meat, there was no more meat left. But it was good, I appreciated it. They made it 3 different ways, it was beautiful, and I really appreciated it. But now you have to trust in Yahweh for it. So it's the same with us. When we give Yahweh our best, and it may be the only thing we have. It may be the only thing we have. It builds faith in Him alone. You're giving your best and trusting that He will provide. We know from Scripture, every priest needed to offer something to Elohim. And we're priests, right? If we go to Hebrews 5, verse 1. Every high priest being taken from men is appointed on behalf of men in the things respecting Elohim, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. We drop down to verse 5. So also the Messiah has not glorified himself to become a high priest, but he glorified the one who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." As he also says in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." Even when he was clothed in flesh, he offered both petitions and supplications with strong crying and tears to him being able to save him from death, and verily he was heard. And though he was a good son, because of the fear and suffering which he endured, he learned obedience. And having been perfected, he came to be the author of eternal salvation for all those obeying him, having been called out by Yahweh as a priest according to the order of Melchizedek. So every priest has to have a gift to offer. And again, he is the high priest of the order of Melchizedek. If it's an order, it shows there's other priests. And we know from Revelation 1:6 and Revelation 5:10, it says we will be kings and priests under him. So literally, we are training of that order. We are Melchizedek priests in training. And that alone, we have messages on that, is a mind blower. You know, to think that the Levite, wow, you look at those Levites, and even yesterday, you know, you see those clothes. Those were not replicas. Those are real clothes they made for the real priest to wear, you know, when he comes along. You know, they have their own loom, because you have to make it with a loom and all the way they do it. And that's just a shadow. You know, that's just an earthly. Yeshua didn't walk in the earthly sanctuary because it was just a type. He walked into heaven itself. So now he's setting us up to be Melchizedek priests of the order of him. So the same way, we have to have gifts to offer. And that gifts is the praise of our lips every day. That gifts is like I was just saying, the best that he's given us that we want to give back to him. You know, and I tell people, even when it comes to tithing, you can't figure it out on paper because it doesn't make sense. It simply doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense even in the congregation. You know, it's like the miracle of the fish and the loaves. How do you try to make sense out of it? You know, you can't feed 5,000 people, you know, with 5 little fish or 2 barley loaves, or the other way around. You can't do it. But it worked. And not only did it work, there were 12 baskets left over. And that's Yahweh's economy. Because Yahweh's economy is you think of others before you think of yourself. In some way or another, it all goes around and there's always leftover. You know, it's just Yahweh's economy. It's the way it works. But you have to have that mindset that as a priest of him, every day we need to have offerings to him. Hebrews 3, let's go back a page, verse 1 and 2. For this reason, holy brothers, called by a call from heaven, consider the apostle and the high priest of our confession, Yeshua Messiah. And that scripture is very interesting because it's one of the many indications showing that this was originally written in Aramaic. I'll read our study note here. It says, the Aramaic word, where it says, brothers, called by a call from heaven, the Aramaic word is Quariar, which comes from the root of Virikia, which is Leviticus, which is the name of the book of Leviticus. Paul is making a wordplay on the changing of the Levitical priesthood to the Melchizedek priesthood. Because when he calls Yeshua the high priest of the confession, that word is Kumriya instead of Cohen. He doesn't use Cohen, he uses Kumriya, showing that Yeshua was a high priest but not a Levite. Not a Levite. So clearly you see in the Aramaic, you understand it much more. You don't get it in the Greek because they don't have those words. It doesn't make sense. But he's comparing us. He's saying we have that same calling, you know, and he's using that word a play on the book of Leviticus, which is the book of the priests, blending us into it, but saying that Yeshua is the high priest, the Kumriya, not the Cohen. He's not a Levitical priest. And then he goes into it in chapter 7, clearly showing the changing of the priesthood from Levi to Melchizedek. And then he says in verse 2, being faithful to him who appointed him, as also Moses was faithful and all his house. Drop down to verse 6. But Messiah as a son over his own house, whose house we are, if truly we hold fast the boldness and rejoicing of the hope firm to the end. So again, we know that he says he's not ashamed to call us brothers, and we are priests according to the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews 11:6, we went over that yesterday. It's impossible to please Yahweh without faith. For those who come to Yahweh must believe he is, and he is a rewarder of those who diligently believe in him and follow him. So we must believe in Yahweh's promises. You must believe in Yahweh's promises, and the sacrificial system is part of that. Because by giving up your best, you have to show faith in Yahweh at that point. You know, there's, if you remember in the New Testament, the story of the beggar on the road when Yeshua is going down to Jericho, and what happens? You know, he's blind, and he's asking Yeshua to heal him. You know, Yeshua, son of David, please heal me. And what happens? Before he's healed, when Yeshua calls him, he says, taking his coat and throwing it down, he comes to Yeshua, and Yeshua heals him. Now, what is important of that? You have to understand the culture to understand the importance of it. That literally in the first century, not anybody could beg. You know, and you had to get special permission, just like today. Maybe you get for your car a handicap sticker, so you could park in a handicap spot. But if you don't have the sticker, what happens? You get a big fine. So the same way in those days, not anybody could, just because there were people that faked it, just like they do today. So you literally had to get something from the government saying, yes, you're really handicapped. And what it was actually a cloak. It was a coat. And when you had that beggar's coat on, people would know this person really is crippled, and they would know, you know, to give some money. So the fact that that man threw his coat down before he was healed showed the faith in Yeshua. Because if he wasn't healed, he's done. He's got no way to survive. And it's the same way with us. You know, that we must come to Yahweh in faith, in belief. It can't be, you know, like they try to do in the financial markets. Well, put half your money in gold and put half your money in this. You know, it's not that way with Yahweh. In Yahweh, you have to invest everything. Faith is investing 100% in him, you know, that we know he's going to provide for us. So that's where it comes up, that you're building this faith. Through the sacrificial system, there was a feeling of building faith because you're sacrificing to Yahweh and he's giving back. And you can see it with Jacob and Laban, right? And what does he say? Laban is getting angry because he's getting jealous. So he's saying to Laban, you know, hey, or Laban's saying to Jacob, hey, you know, you're doing this, and he's feeling unfair. And what does Jacob say? All right, you know what? Let's separate. You take the goats that are speckled, and I'll take the goats that are striped, and leave it up to Yahweh. And what happens? All of a sudden, all the ones are speckled, and then they all come to Jacob, and then the next day he says, wait a second, let's change it around, and then they're all striped, and Yahweh's providing for him. So it's the same way with us, you know, that Yahweh will care for us. It's that we're not worried about holding on to what we think is important, but Yahweh will care for us. He will care for us. So again, Hebrews 11:6, one of the most important scriptures in the New Testament, because we all want to please Yahweh, and it's impossible to please him without faith. Romans 4, about our father Abraham, great chapter, really, really awesome chapter. I'll read verses 1 through 8, then I'll drop down to 16. It says, what then shall we say our father Abraham to have found according to flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he had reason to be proud, but not with Elohim. For what does the scripture say? And Abraham believed Yahweh, and it was counted to him for righteousness. Now to one working, the reward is not counted according to grace, but according to debt. But to the one not working, but believing on him justifying sinners, his faith is counted for righteousness. Even as also David says of the blessedness of the man to whom Elohim counts righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose sins are forgiven, and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom Yahweh will in no way charge sin. Up down to verse 16. On account of this, it is of faith that it be according to grace, for the promise to be certain to all the seed, that not to that of the law only, but also to that of the faith of Abraham, who is father of us all. According as it has been written, I have appointed you a father of many nations before Elohim, whom ye believe, the one making the dead live, and calling the things that are not as if they were. He against hope believed in hope, for him to become a father of many nations, according to what has been said, so shall your seed be. And being about 100 years old, He never weakened in faith, even when he examined his own body, nor the deadness of Sarah's womb. And he did not hesitate at the promise of Elohim as one lacking faith, but he was strong in faith and gave glory to Elohim, and felt assured that what Yahweh had promised to him, he was able to fulfill. Because of this, it was also counted to him for righteousness. But it was not written for him only that it was counted to him, but also on account of us, to whom it is about to be counted, to the ones believing on him, who has raised our Master Yeshua from the dead, who was delivered because of our offenses and was raised because of our justification. So we see the same faith that was accounted to Abraham is accounted to us as children of Abraham, that are believing in the resurrection. Hebrews 11. Back to Hebrews 11. Verse 17. By faith, Abraham in his trial offered up Isaac, and he laid on the altar his only son, whom he had received by promise. As to whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called. And he reasoned within himself that Elohim was able to raise him even from the dead, and because of this Isaac was given to him as a parable. Like I said, wow, Abraham, the faith he must have had. Can you imagine? You're 75 years old, you know, you're over there on your Social Security, although they didn't have that back in those days. You're ready to retire, although that's not a concept that they had in those days either. But you are old, and that's a concept they did have, being old. And here it is, Yahweh says, get up and leave. I'm sure at 75 years old, that wasn't the first thing on his mind, getting up and just leaving to a place he had no idea, but he just did it. No questions asked, he goes. And then Yahweh comes and tells him he's going to have a child, you know, at 99 years old. Sarah is 90, and we know that Sarah laughed. And I don't think she laughed really in unbelief. I think she laughed like, if you were 90 years old and someone said, you're going to have a child too, you kind of chuckle, you know. That, and then she got scared because she laughed, and that's what Yitzhak means, she laughed, you know. But Abraham still believed. He still believed. And face it, at 100 years old, what good is that son to him? You know, his life is basically over. He's too old to really enjoy it. I'm sure he's not going and playing ball with, you know, little Yitzhak out in the backyard. You know, probably can't even throw him up in the air. So what good is it to him? But the reason why he was so excited was, not that just Yahweh fulfilled a promise, because he knew that promise was eternal. The same way he came to this land and he was a stranger in his own land. So he wasn't coming here looking around for the fulfillment then. But like it says in Hebrew, he was looking for a fatherland from before. So Abraham, who never saw the resurrection, who didn't live in the time to see Yeshua die and resurrect, he believed in the resurrection. And what does he say here? After all this, and even after getting this son at 100 years old, and you know, I can imagine, I'm 48 and running after a little 5-year-old. I can't imagine if I was 99. But still, what happens? Now Yahweh comes and says, kill the child. He doesn't question. What does he say? If Yahweh can kill him, then Yahweh can raise him up. Beautiful parallel of the resurrection, and he played it perfectly. And that's why he becomes the father of the faithful. Because he didn't question, and he never held back even the best he had. And that's the same with us. You know, we can't question Yahweh. Ours is not to question. Ours is to believe. Ours is to believe. So when Yahweh shows us something, and one thing you'll find out when you start this faith walk, it's like those little, when you're a child, you know, you have those little connect the dots. And if you have connect the dots up to 50, and you go from 19 to 36, you know, you're not going to come out with a giraffe. You're going to come out with maybe something new that nobody's ever seen before. You have to connect the dots to dot. And that's the way faith is. If Yahweh is taking you from point A to point B, He's not going to tell you C until you get to B. But we have that mindset. We want to know what the picture is before we start connecting the dots. Because we want to see if it's worth making the picture. But we have to have the faith that that picture, when it's done, is going to have so much glory and so much brightness and so much goodness that we won't be able to even look upon it. And that's the faith, you know, that whatever it is, all things work out for good of those who love Yahweh, those called according to purpose. That at the end of the day, even if it's a trial that He's blessing us with, at the end of the road, there's something good coming out from it. But you can only see that if you totally surrender to Yahweh. You have to believe in faith. You have to believe the good, the bad, and the indifferent is all from Him, and it's all for some kind of good reason. That there's nothing that He would allow it to happen to us that wouldn't be for our benefit. And it's all part of the sacrificial system. That was all part of this sacrificial system of building that trust. Building that trust even to the point of Isaac, his own son, not an animal. Building the trust that anything you sacrifice for Yahweh, He's going to give you back 1,000-fold. We also see from the situation with Isaac and Abraham that sometimes the greatest sacrifice we can give sometimes is even in our death. I always remember Naomi Duggar sharing with me about her father and saying, yeah, it's really strange to me because when my father was alive, everybody hated him. Nobody listened to him. See, now that he's dead, all these people are interested in him and his work and everything he did. And like the Apostle Paul, you think of the Apostle Paul. Here he is for years. The greater part of his time as a believer was spent in prison. Now, you read his epistles, and you see it had to be discouraging at times. He went through a lot. Who of us have went through shipwreck, lashes, scourgings, being marooned on a desert island, being beaten, being all these different things that he went through. So many things that we couldn't even imagine. And then to be in prison for many, many years, Joseph was in prison for 13 years. David was running from Saul for 13 years. For Paul, it was most of his time. But during those times in prison, it drew him closer to Yahweh, and we have these epistles now that he wrote, 14 epistles, that have given brethren encouragement for the last 2,000 years. He even says at the end of his life, I'm all alone, they all left me. And you could see how discouraged he was. That everything he went through, he's over here by himself in the end. The Apostle John, they claim, was a heretic, by the end of his life. So sometimes in your death, after you're not around anymore, what you did, your legacy, what you left, can do a lot more than even in your life. And that's why we're not trying to hold on to this life. We're trying to live every day in this life as a living sacrifice, so that even if Yahweh took our life, there's something more to go on. That it's not just the physical, there's something more. We left something to this world. We left something to the brethren. We left something to our children. We're leaving a legacy. First thing we do at the Bible school, first week you're there, is you come up with your legacy. What is your legacy going to be? Because if you don't have one, if you don't have a plan to get there, you're never going to do it. You need a plan of action as a believer. You have to know, hey, you know what? I might have one more day, or I might have 20 or 30 years in this life, but I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to use it to glorify Yahweh. So I am going to get a plan, I'm going to write it down, and I'm going to get a way to get there. And then we'll figure out your spiritual gifts that will help you get there. And I say, before you leave that school, there isn't one person who's ever come, in the 10, 11 years we've been doing it, that left there without knowing what their gift was and without having the plan of action. And once they leave, you're on your own. I mean, I'll help you, but you're on your own. I can coach you to a degree, but then there comes the point you have to do it for yourself. But there's never been anybody who did not leave there without the vision to do it. And we have to. We have to have that. We have to have our plan of action, and we have to know what our legacy is going to be. And it's all part of it. Because like I said, we sacrifice to Yahweh in life, and we sacrifice to Yahweh in death. And then we believe in the resurrection, and that's where our reward is. Our reward is in the resurrection of the just. We go to 1 Chronicles 23. First Chronicles 23 and verse 29, a very interesting scripture from King David. Because we know today we don't sacrifice animals. It's not part of the culture, like they said yesterday. A lot of places it's not even legal, even if you wanted to. And of course the Bible does say you do have to, any sacrifice to Yahweh now has to be at the sanctuary. Leviticus 17. But David said something very interesting here in 1 Chronicles 23, 29 through 30. He's telling all the priests and what their jobs are going to be and what they're doing. And he says, both for the bread of arrangement and for the fine flour to food offering, and for the unleavened cakes and for the pan and for what is well mixed and for every measure and size. He's telling them what they're going to prepare every day. And he says, even to stand every morning to thank and praise Yahweh, and likewise at evening. So the evening and the morning sacrifice, has become a prayer sacrifice. It's become a prayer sacrifice. And every day we wake up, the first thing we should do is first pinch yourself to make sure you didn't die in your sleep and you're not in the resurrection. And as soon as you figure out you are still flesh and alive, get on your hands and knees and praise Yahweh. Thank Him for the day. Thank Him for what you do. And now, offer to Him the daily sacrifice. Not an animal, but the praise of the thanksgiving of your lips. That, Father, you've given me breath today. Let me glorify you this day. Let me glorify you in my actions. Let me glorify you with the gifts you've given me. Let me glorify you any way I can. Because that's what our reasonable service is, as we'll read here in a second. It's our reasonable service to glorify Yahweh with a living sacrifice, not an animal. So here we see that the daily sacrifice is still there. It's never left. It's a sacrifice of praise, and that's really what even the animal sacrifices were. It wasn't about, like I said, just killing an animal. The killing of the animal was an avenue to draw us closer to Yahweh. Now through His Spirit, we draw closer through praise, sacrifice, and we draw closer to Him. The more you give up, the closer to Him you draw. Because like we said, it builds your faith and your trust. Romans 12, 1 and 2. Now, in the Garden of Eden, there was no killing of animals. There was not even a sanctuary there. The presence of Yahweh was there. But that's what the Garden of Eden was about. It was about, in the Garden of Eden, before sin came, the system was drawing closer through praise, not through the killing of animals. Of course, sin changed that temporarily, but now in the Melchizedek order, we're going back to Eden, as it says. So Romans 12 says, "Therefore, brethren, I call on you through the compassions of Elohim, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly pleasing to Elohim, which is your reasonable service," as we were just saying. "And be not conformed to this age." If you're not sanctified, you're not going to be able to do it, because the things of the world Yahweh hates, they're contrary to Him. "But be transformed by the renewing of your mind," like we were talking about the other day, putting on the mind of Messiah, so any kind of worldly thought that comes in, you want to grab it, package it, get rid of it. "In order to prove by you what is the good and pleasing and perfect will of Elohim." And it really is. That is the miracle. You know, the mystery of the good news, it says in Colossians 1, is Messiah in you, the hope of glory. That literally, it's something that's real. It's not just a nice little thing we do. It's not just something where you're joining something. No, literally, when you enter covenant with Yahweh, and you repent of your sins, and you're dying to the old man, and you have the laying on of hands, and His Spirit is coming in you, literally now, He is transforming you. But again, if you stay in the world, if you do the same thing, nothing will happen. Just like a dormant seed you can throw on the ground. If you don't put humus on it, and you don't put nice dirt and fertilize it, if you don't water it every day, nothing will happen to that seed. It'll stay there. But if you do, if you sanctify yourself, if you come out of the world, if you watch all these things like we were saying, that seed will grow into a tree planted by a riverside. You know, and literally, it will give you eternity. So that's what we want to do, to draw closer to Him now. You know, in the sacrificial system, the daily sacrifice, it's a transformation of your mind. But never forget that. It's the most powerful thing we have, and the most thing that Satan wants to trick you on. You have the mind of Messiah. You have to nurture it. You have to nurture it. First Peter 2. Let's go to 1 Peter 2. And 5. "To whom you have come, because He is a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen of Yahweh by precious." Do you remember on Pesach night when we read the great Hallel? Psalm 118, "The stone the builders have rejected has become the head of the corner. You also, as living stones, are being built into a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Yahweh through Yeshua Messiah." So now we're taking the intent of the sacrificial system, which the intent was never killing an animal. The killing of the animal was just an avenue that Yahweh used when sin entered the world. But now the intent is still the same. of drawing closer to through relationship, of giving the best we have to Yahweh, and building total faith with Him. That's the whole point of the system. So now we're doing that as living stones, a holy priesthood to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Yahweh through Yeshua Messiah. Drop down to verse 9. But you are an elect race, a royal priesthood, a holy people, a people for possession, that you should proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness to His precious light. You who then were not a people, but now are the people of Yahweh, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained the mercies poured out upon you. So we're seeing Yahweh's will being fulfilled. So again, the intent of it, once you understand the intent of the sacrificial system, I don't think you would ever ask the question again, why sacrifices? It's pretty evident why the sacrifices are. Because it's the meaning of it is what is important, not the sacrifice itself. We could drop down to verse 18. We'll see the example that Yeshua set for us how to be a living sacrifice. Servants, be obedient to your masters in all fear, not only to those good and forbearing, but also to the perverse ones. For this is favor before Elohim, if because of conscience anyone bears grief, suffering unjustly. For what glory is it if you patiently endure suffering because of your sinning? But if you are suffering while doing good and patiently endure, then your glory is greater from Elohim. For you were called to this, for even Messiah suffered on our behalf, leaving behind an example for us, that you should follow his steps. Who did not sin, nor was guile found in his mouth, who having been reviled, did not revile in return. Suffering, he did not threaten, but gave himself up to him who was judging righteously, who himself carried up his body, our sins, unto the tree, that dying to sins we might live to righteousness, of whom by his wounds you were healed. For you were a sheep going astray, but now you turn back to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. So again, the sacrifice to Yahweh, you don't see the sheep there fighting and saying, I'm not going, you're not going to do this to me. The same way that Isaac was a willing participant. And think about it. If you look at the word for lad or boy, when it's talking about Isaac, he was probably around 16 to 18 years old, somewhere around there. So he wasn't a 5-year-old youth. Now here's Abraham, 100 and whatever, 113, 114. Easily Isaac could have overthrown his father. And that's the beauty of it. It wasn't just Abraham's faith to take the life of Isaac. It was Isaac's faith in his father to allow his life to be given. And that's the point. As living sacrifices, now we are that living sacrifice, right? So when Yahweh is purifying us, and He's using us as an example to the world, like I said, with the mind of Messiah, you can do things that are unhuman. It is unhuman to love your enemy. It is unhuman to pray for those who despitefully use you. And by doing that, what we're doing is we're showing the example of the Messiah, and we're becoming that willing living sacrifice. And like he says, if you suffer when you do wrong, and you take it patiently, so what? So what? You're only getting what you deserve. But if you suffer while you did nothing wrong, and you set the example of the Messiah as a living sacrifice, that is pleasing and acceptable to Yahweh. So, when it happens, when someone lies about you, or does something, or gossips, or whatever it is, maybe at work, you're accused of something, or someone gets a promotion that you should have got, don't get mad. Don't think of it in a worldly way. Think of it as you're being used as an example of Yahweh as a living sacrifice. He's using your example to teach others the same thing. How we patiently endure all things. The same way that Isaac did, the same way that Yeshua did. And that's part of being living sacrifices to Him. That we patiently endure because we trust in Him that whatever is coming our way, number one, it's for our good, and at the end of the day, it's going to be something that's going to benefit us. And I talk at the school, we talk about powering beliefs and dispowering beliefs. And we all have both of them. And I help the people with dispowering beliefs how to get them out of your life. Because if you have a dispowering belief, number one, normally they're not true, and it will really inhibit you. Like there's people that are afraid to get on an airplane. That's a dispowering belief. What is some of the consequences of that? Well, number one, they'll probably never come here to the feast unless they can swim across the Atlantic Ocean or one of these other ones. So it's something that is dispowering your life. But empowering beliefs are things that are so powerful to get you through. And one of my empowering beliefs is, that I firmly believe 1000%, is that nothing could happen to me that isn't ultimately for my good. So that means through death, through suffering, through sickness, through no matter what, I believe that if Yahweh allowed it, somehow there's got to be somewhere for my good. It stops depression, it stops questioning, it stops doubt. It's a great empowering belief, and we all need it, and that's what we need to do. We need to get rid of the disempowering, we need to embrace the empowering beliefs. And that's what's going to make us stronger believers. But it's all part of the reason for sacrifices. Because we need to understand this so we can be these living sacrifices. And it's something that we have to really do from the bottom of our heart so that it is the right example. Psalm 51. One verse, verse 17. He says, the sacrifices of Elohim are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart of Elohim you will not despise. And like I say, if you've never been broken, you never really repented. Repentance is not just feeling sorry for something you did, it's feeling sorry for who you are. And that's why the sacrifices of Yahweh are a broken spirit. A broken spirit. That's the way your pride goes, when He breaks our spirits. And then we're built up in Him. And then you don't build self-righteousness, you build Yahweh righteousness through His Word. We go back to 1 Peter. 1 Peter 1 in verse 3. Blessed be the Elohim and Father of our Master Yeshua Messiah. He, according to His great mercy, having regenerated us to a living hope, through the resurrection of Yeshua Messiah from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled and unfading, having been kept in heaven for you, while you were kept by the power of Elohim, being guarded through faith to a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time, wherein you will rejoice forever, notwithstanding at the present time you are pressed a little by the various trials that have come upon you, so that the proving of your faith, much more precious than perishing gold, but having been proved through fire, may be made manifest to praise and honor and glory at the revelation of Yeshua Messiah, whom having not seen, yet you love, and in whose faith you rejoice with exceeding joy that cannot be described. And you will receive the reward of your faith, even the salvation of your souls. So wow, what a powerful scripture that is. The proving of our faith, what is it doing? It's manifesting us the praise and the honor and the glory of the revelation of Yeshua Messiah. But we need to be rejoicing because we know every single trial, like we said, baptism of water, baptism of fear, baptism of fire. It's the baptism of fire that's purifying ourselves so that we'll be ready at His return with white garments. 1 Corinthians 6 in 19 and 20. It says, or do you not know that your body is a sanctuary of the Holy Spirit in you, which you have from Elohim, and you are not of yourself? You were bought with a price, then glorify Elohim in your body and in your spirit, which belong to Elohim. So literally, it is our reasonable service that, again, every person on this earth that's born has free will and free choice. Yahweh gives us that. He gives us everything we need in the Torah to make those choices. I put before you life and death. Choose life. But we still have the choice. And you can choose. You can choose to live a wonderful, great life in this world that you may think for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, as much as you have breath. But then at the end of it, we're all going to die. Like I tell the atheists, it's really interesting that all these people that say Elohim doesn't exist, they're all in wooden boxes in the earth, and He's still alive. Isn't that interesting? Who am I going to believe, the dead one or the living one? And it's the same here. Because if you live for only these 50, 60, 70 years, if you're lucky, then the resurrection is going to come and you're going to die. But if you follow the reason for sacrifices, if you draw closer to Yahweh, if you give the best to Him, if you in faith allow Him to direct your life, and you're living as a living sacrifice of Yeshua, then you're going to live forever. And that's the promise we have, the promise of the resurrection, the promise to live forever. And it's all centered on the reason for sacrifices. So the last thing I just want to go into briefly, particularly because of yesterday being at the Temple Institute and mentioning in the beginning, we do know in the millennium there will be sacrifices. It does say in Zechariah 6:12 that the man whose name is the branch, it's in capital letters, as we see from Isaiah 11, the root that comes, the shoot that comes from the root of Jesse, the Messiah, the branch, that he will build the sanctuary of Yahweh, the temple, and he will bear the glory. So there's nothing in Scripture that would even remotely make us think that Yahweh has given man in these end times any authority to rebuild the temple. Zero. And if we look at Isaiah 66, let's look at what Yahweh says about this temple that will be built, that He does not give His authority to build it. Isaiah 66 says, "So says Yahweh, heaven is my throne, and earth the footstool of my feet. Where then is the house that you'll build for me? And where then is the place of my rest? And my hand has made all these things. Even all these things exist, declare Yahweh. But I will look toward this one," like we were saying today, "to the humbled one, to the contrite of spirit, even trembling at my word." So that's what we said. Today we are to be living sacrifices. Today we are to show the example of Messiah in being a living sacrifice and not reviling back for reviling, not giving evil for evil. And that's what He says. But look what He says to the ones who are literally, though, going to build a temple and do the sacrificing. "He who slaughters an ox is as if he struck a man. He who sacrifices a lamb, as if he broke a dog's neck. He who offers a present, as if it were swine's blood. He making mention of incense, is as if he blessed an idol. Yea, they have chosen their way, and their soul delights in their abominations. I also will choose their vexations, and I will bring their fears to them. Because I called, and no one answered. I spoke, and they did not hear. But they did the evil in my eyes, and chose that in which I have no pleasure." So very, very clearly, this temple, if and when it is built, really has nothing to do with us as Melchizedek priests, but we are waiting for Mashiach, and that was what was shocking when she said, "We don't need the Ark of the Covenant, we don't need the Mashiach. We will build it ourselves." Like it says in Isaiah, that He will cut it down and we will build with, cedars. He will cut down the oaks and we will build with cedars. That they're not looking for Elohim to direct it, they're just looking for the work of man. So, again, the reason for sacrifices, I think they're extremely important to us today, because as living sacrifices we have to understand the reasons why Yahweh did it, and that it draws us closer to Him through relationship. And what a blessing that He chooses us to be living sacrifices to Him. Yahweh bless.